Welcome to part 2. You may find it's difficult to acquire elastic for the earpieces, and so in this video I will show you how to make one with fabric ties. Now this mask is wider than the one that I did in the previous video. It's actually 10 inches wide instead of 8.5 inches. This is designed to accommodate larger faces or perhaps men with beards. Now I have all sizes of mask measurements linked in the description below, so check those out if you want to make a child-size mask, a adult mask, or the extra large mask. In addition to the fabric, you will also need 2 long pieces of bias tape. Now I cut this from the straight grain of the fabric, so this is 45 inches long by 1 7/8 inches wide. Now of note, you don't need to make your bias tape for this project from the true bias, as this can be cut from the straight grain of the fabric. You'll also need a metal earpiece, and at the end of the video I'll include a link to the first video where I show you how I form my metal earpieces as well as how I make my own bias tape. Let's begin sewing. First of all, bring the raw edges together at the top of the mask and form 3 pleats running down each side. You need to leave a 1/2 inch at both the top and the bottom, so the gathering begins a 1/2 inch down, and use a basting stitch to hold the pleats in place. I use a seam ripper to help get that fabric underneath the presser foot so that I can get those pleats basted in place. The 3rd pleat is done at the bottom of the mask, and you again need to leave another 1/2 inch at the bottom of the mask clear so that you can sew the bias tape in. You then flip the fabric over and repeat the pleat making process on the other side of the mask. This should go a little bit easier because you already have the pleats started on the other side, and you just follow along the same lines that you used on the first pleat. Again, leave that 1/2 inch at the bottom and the top so that we can add that bias tape later on. Next, we need to add the first bias tape strip to one side of the mask. This time we're going to switch to a regular stitch, not a basting stitch, and take that first strip of bias tape and use that to enclose the raw edges on the right side of the mask. You then take the second piece of bias tape and attach it to the other side. After trimming off the long length of bias tape from where you had encased the mask on the right-hand side, you need to find the center of the remaining piece of tape. Pin the center of the tape to the center of the top of the mask. Then go to the end of the tape and tuck inside the raw edges and begin stitching along the length of the tape. As you approach the point at which the bias tape meets the mask, you need to slow down and make sure that you have the mask fabric tucked into the bias tape strip. Go ahead and continue sewing over the bias tape and the mask, and be sure and backstitch at the end of the fabric so that you make sure that the ties are held in securely. Continue sewing along, readjusting the fabric to ensure that the raw edge of the mask fabric is encased in the bias tape, And again, when you get to the other end of the mask, make sure that you backstitch to secure the ties in place. Continue sewing along the bias tape strip until you get to the end, where once again you're going to fold the raw edges into the tie to make sure that they are not exposed. You're going to repeat the process on the other side of the mask, but this is a little bit more tricky because we need to insert the nose piece. So again, create a tuck at the end of the bias strip and begin sewing until you get to where the mask fabric meets the bias tape. Once again, you'll need to make sure that you reposition the fabric so the fabric is tucked into the bias tape. And again, backstitch once you get to the place where the two meet. Next, you grab the wire piece and center it on the mask, and you continue to sew until you get to the very end of that wire piece. You turn the fabric and then you sew back and forth several times to create an end piece for the wire. You then stitch several 5, 6, 7 stitches, and then tuck the wire piece into that little pocket that you've made. And again, sew back and forth so that you make sure that that wire piece does not move around once it's inside the mask. Continue sewing along the wire piece, making sure that you continue to feel where the wire is as you stitch. At the end, there will be the little curly cue that you will hold your finger over as you stitch till you come close to it. And I stitch in to the right so that I can create another little pocket at the other end to hold that wire to make sure it doesn't slip. Then continue on as you did before, making sure that you backstitch at the end of the mask to secure the tie in place, and continue on the rest of the way till you get to the other end of the tie. And you're done. Be sure and check out part 1 of the video series to find out how I make the bias tape and form the metal nose pieces.
This has been a Loki production.